Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, peace I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. That is John chapter 14, verses 26 and 27. I'm Sandra Flach, your host. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, where I am here to encourage and equip you for your parenting journey. As a mom of 8, 3 bios, 1 kinship, 4 through international adoption, I've been on this parenting journey for like 3 decades. 5 of my kids have experienced childhood trauma. 2 are diagnosed with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And my hope is that you will find this podcast to be an invaluable resource for your parenting journey. Before we get started, we have a great guest with us today, but I want to make sure that you are aware of our new social media pages for the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. And I invite you to go over and like and follow them. We are on both Facebook and Instagram. Of course, Instagram, we are at AFC_journey. And on Facebook, it is just the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. So I look forward to connecting with you over there. And as long as we're talking about connecting, I'd love to meet you in person. And this coming fall, which is right around the corner, hard to believe, I will be at the CAFO, the Christian Alliance for Orphans Summit in Houston, Texas on October 1st through the 3rd, where I will be leading a workshop and hosting a meetup for parents and caregivers of kiddos with FASD. And we'll have an exhibitor table, so you can connect with me lots of different ways at CAFO. And later that month, I will be at the Replanted Conference in Chicago. That is October 23rd through 25th. Stop by my booth there and say hi, as well as I'll also be teaching an FASD breakout session at Replanted as well. And I highly recommend both of these incredible Christian adoption and foster care conferences. You will have your cup overflowing if you attend either one of these. And I'll be there and look forward to connecting with you there as well if you can get out and get there. So today, like I mentioned, we have an amazing guest with us, a fellow adoptive mom, Crystal Dethlefs. Trying to say her name without messing it up. But Crystal is a woman of faith, a mother of 7 young adults, and has been married to her high school sweetheart, Mike, for 37 years. She homeschooled her older children through graduation and has over 22 years of lived experience parenting children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. She and I are like, gosh, soul sisters here. I can't wait to chat with her. Crystal's personal journey began when 4 of her adopted children, initially diagnosed without guidance by a doctor at an ADHD clinic, were later confirmed to have an FASD. This launched her into years of dedicated research, advocacy, and training. She has received training through FACETS, TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention, Families Moving Forward, and she participates in Jeff Noble's Caregiver Club coaching program. Crystal currently serves as the parent advocate at the Florida Center FASD Clinic and sits on her local behavioral health care advisory committee. With ministry training from the District School of Ministry, Crystal continues to serve families with both compassion and practical support. Please welcome Crystal Dethlefs. Hey, Crystal.
Hi there. How are you?
I am good, and I am thrilled to finally have you on the show. I know we haven't met in person, but I know when we started chatting earlier, I'm like, we're twins after I read your bio. And we've been connected on social media, I know, but I'm just so excited to get to know you and learn all about what you're doing in the FASD community. And of course, I want our listeners to get to know you too. So thanks so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Very
Yeah. Oh,
excited.
it's an honor. I'm excited too. So I always like to kind of start at the beginning of the adoption story. So I know that you and your husband, Mike, have adopted. What led you guys to pursue foster care and adoption?
Well, I think it had always been in my heart that I'd like to adopt at some point. And then we had three children pretty close together. And I felt a lot of pressure from my doctor to be a responsible parent and, not keep having children. It was kind of I was young and very impressionable. I, my backbone grew quite a bit through that experience, but I did end up having my tubes tied after our third and regretted it right away.
Mhm.
And so that kind of started us on this road.
Wow. So I know you have seven children, so you have three bios, like me, three bios. And then you adopted four, and you did that
Sure.
through foster care. So tell us about that whole process, bringing your kids home.
Yeah, it was, very. So we wanted more children. Our kiddos wanted more children too. You hear about moms sometimes getting baby fever. My kids had baby fever so bad, and that was breaking my heart. And so we got serious about, looking into adoption. Had a friend in our town that runs a crisis pregnancy center. So I started talking to her, and around that time is when foster care in Florida it was going to be privatized. And so she put me in touch with the one of the agencies that was going to do that. And our heart's desire was to adopt. And so going this route, of course, there was a lot of talk about, are probably not going to get a baby. That, we have a lot of older kiddos that need to be adopted. Um, and so we did all the necessary paperwork, the classes and all of that, and got started in it. We had several kiddos that would come and stay with us once we got our license. And it was so difficult because we had gone into it with the intention to adopt. It was so difficult when little ones or older ones would have to leave our home. And it was really difficult on our biological kids. Mike and I felt like we had the tools to, kind of deal with that and get through it and put the children that were coming into our home, put their needs first above, the hurt that we might have when they left. But it was just becoming too much for our kids. And so we had to make the decision that we told our agency that we just were not going to be able to do it anymore unless there were, children that were going to be able to stay with us. And so at that point, I didn't think it was going to happen. We just went on with life. Life was busy anyway with three kids, so we didn't sit around and think about it too much. But about a month after that, we received a call that there was a baby girl that had been born. She already had other siblings that had been TPR'd, parental rights were terminated, and they asked if we would like to meet her, and we jumped at the chance. And so that's the first of our adopted kiddos. She is now 22, and in pretty rapid succession, uh, there were siblings born about once a year after that. And we knew, and so our first daughter that we adopted is African American, and I'm, very pale, very fair skin. My husband is a redhead. So, all of our kiddos, everybody's pretty pale. So we knew that we were going to adopt a second time, because we just, we wanted that for our daughter. Um, we were not expecting that we would adopt three more times and end up with four little ones. But we're really glad that that's how it happened. Two of our sons were micro preemies, so when they were born a year apart, and both of them were less than about a pound and a half when they were born. So they were itty bitty guys.
Goodness. And so all four of the children you adopted are siblings.
Yep. At
Wow.
least on their biological mother. They all have the same first mom.
Yeah, that's incredible because my husband and I have three kids as well. We were not looking to adopt or foster or any of that. And you know how the Lord sort of like kind of circumvents what you're doing and
Yeah.
like puts it in front of you. And so we did a kinship adoption. We had a little girl come to live with us who was a relative who we eventually adopted and then felt led to adopt internationally. So we have four siblings that we adopted internationally, and weren't expecting to have four either. So stories are overlap in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So gosh, so I know that so you bring in you adopt four in pretty quick amount of time. Um, how did you become trauma informed? Because I know for us, the way we adopted, we didn't have any training in advance. And it wasn't until, we were in over our heads that we realized we need help and we need some training. And I found the Connected Child book and Dr. Karen Purvis and Empowered to Connect and all of that, which was a huge lifesaver for us. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so we were kind of the same way. We had the classes that we were required to take in order to get our foster license. And of course, they talk some about trauma, but in those days, I'm really glad to see how things have changed now. But in those days, it was mostly hearing about some of the stuff that brings children to a place of needing foster care or needing to be adopted. And the stories were, of course, heartbreaking. But there wasn't a lot of talk about how what it's like to try to parent littles or not so littles that, have been from traumatic places. And so some of it, I wish really badly if I could go back, I wish that I would have listened to my own instincts a lot more. Because I was, very attachment based kind of mom.
Mhm.
I was not ever the mom that, thought a baby needed to cry it out to learn to sleep at night. um, Carried my babies around in the sling, wore them. And I did a lot of that still with my little ones, but we were also, trying to do the right thing. We were trying to be good parents, and teach our kiddos responsibility and make them into good little children that are going to function well in society and all of that. And so I wish that I had not tried so much to fit into what I thought was expected or what we were being told was expected, not sparing the rod and all that. But
Right.
we found out very quickly, even though we didn't have, a lot of the trauma-informed parenting at that point, we found out really quickly that traditional parenting was not working with our children anyway. Even a timeout for them, their feelings seemed to be hurt. And I didn't understand that. I was, kids don't like to be disciplined, but to be actually have their feelings hurt was just, I don't know. It might be kind of a small thing, but it really stood out to me, and I didn't know what was going on, so that, I do wish that we'd had more of the trauma-informed um, education.
Yeah, I hear you because I know like with our first coming in through kinship, she didn't go into foster care because she came to us. And so we didn't have even foster parent training classes. We had nothing. And then the way we adopted internationally, we used an out-of-state agency and just the way things kind of came together with that. There was also no training at all for that. So by then I knew enough to maybe read a book about attachment. And I read this teensy weensy little bit online about fetal alcohol syndrome because we adopted from Ukraine. And I had heard somewhere somebody said, maybe back in the olden days when we went into chat rooms to do our connecting and research, somebody said that was common in children adopted from Eastern Europe. So I read a little bit about that. It was super scary. And I thought, oh, that's not going to happen to us,
Mhm.
and, just moved on and went on my merry way. And and amazingly, our three kids, the first three kids that came home from Ukraine, they sort of clicked into our family. There was a lot of craziness that went on. They were hungry and there was a lot of doctor's appointments and we were homeschooling. I was trying to figure that out, but there wasn't super hard behavioral stuff that I was noticing. Looking back now, knowing what I know, I'm like, oh, there was probably a little bit going on and I just didn't recognize it for what it was. But when we met our youngest in the orphanage, when we went back for the fourth one, we knew we were not equipped. We were going to need some help and finally getting him home and then just trying to desperately survive. That's when I found out about I found the Connected Child book and went to, we live in New York and we flew to Nashville where Dr. Purvis herself was doing an Empowered to Connect conference. So we got lots of that training. So what about you? I know that you've done some trust-based relational intervention, TBRI training. What was that like for you?
So by the time we found that, like our youngest was about 8 years old, when a doctor casually said, oh, what do you know about, um, uh, your child's birth history and possible exposure to drugs or alcohol. So I shared a little bit with him, and he said, "Oh yeah, that makes sense because this one has FAS." And at that point, we knew that they had been exposed to alcohol, but life was just so crazy busy that we didn't have time to think much about that. We were, because they were born so small, we were still trying to keep everybody alive, basically. We had apnea monitors and, you know, um, repeated hospitalizations early on. So looking back, there are things that went over my head, but um, so when he said that and really gave no kind of guidance or anything, um, like most moms, I hit the internet and started searching, trying to find anything because it was terrifying to me. I knew enough about it only to be scared of,
Yes.
you know, that term, fetal alcohol syndrome. Um, it's still a scary term.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but it was through that research that I began to learn little things here and there. And it was through that I learned about the Florida Center and their FASD clinic in Sarasota. And so I was connected with them for many years before my kids actually went and got diagnosed with them. But one of the first things, Tamara Chayo is the director there, and when she found out where I live in Florida, she asked me, she said, well, because I was sharing with her how frustrating it is, because there was absolutely no support where we were, and we felt like we were just completely drowning. So she asked me where I was in Florida, and I told her, she said, well, the Pearl Project is right there. And I said, no, I don't know what that is. And so she told me, and they were, um, uh, our local foster and adoptive support. And they currently had, a training going on for TBRI. And I've got somebody at my door knocking. I don't know if you can hear that.
Nope, can't hear it.
Okay. Okay. But he's got somebody with him, so it's okay. Um, and so at that point, though, like I said, my youngest was about 8 years old. So
Mhm.
we were between, like 8 and 9 with all four of them. And really, like I said, drowning. Um, and I remember listening to some of the things that they were teaching. With the TBRI. And at first it was almost like I was so desperate for the information. I was so glad that we had found it and that we were there, but it felt like it was too late for me. I can remember sitting there and I just had tears rolling down my face. Um, and that's all I could think is that I wish that we had found this earlier because things would be so different at this point. And now, it's great for the other people. Um, I'm glad for them, but I think it's too late for us. And actually, looking back, so it took us a couple of years to get to that point. So I think that actually they weren't between 8 and 10 and that. They were like pushing teenage years because it did take us a couple of years to connect with the Pearl Project. So that was my first impression of TBRI. I wish we had found it earlier because it's just too late for us now.
Wow. But it wasn't too late.
It was not too late. The director of Pearl Project is Joy Zedler, and she is just really, really wonderful. She's one of those people in my life that, was part of a big turnaround. Tamara is one of those, Joy, Jeff Noble, my friend Barb. And she just, counseled me on some things and encouraged me to just, take it slow. If you can just take one thing out of what you're hearing and apply that one thing, just concentrate on that. And so that's what we started to do. And it was a very easy, well, I don't know, it seemed kind of easy. We just decided as a couple, Mike and I decided that we were going to stop saying no. We were going to find different ways to answer questions. And if the answer had to be no, we were going to rephrase it and
Mhm.
reframe it somehow. And just blew us away at how effective that one small change was. And absolutely saw that it was not too late for us. TBRI was working for us. Um, I think it could work at any stage. I use it even with my older kids,
Yeah.
even now because um, it just feels right too, because I had been, an attachment-based mom.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the things that they were teaching, I felt like, was going back to what I had originally, you know, my instincts were telling me originally to do, and tradition was saying, no, you can't do it that way because then, you're going to be raising, entitled children and they're going to walk all over you. And really, that's not the case at all. So much of any positive relationship in our life, if we can keep it based in connection and based in that relationship, covers so much else. And really, when we look to the example of our Father God, that's how He is with us too. He's relationship, He is after our heart. And it works for parenting too.
Yeah, it absolutely works. And I'm, very similar to you where we didn't know, we didn't let that saying, we didn't know what we didn't know. But once we began to learn some of those principles through trust-based relational intervention, whether you're reading the Connected Child book or Empowered to Connect or wherever you're getting that, um, they work even if you're not applying them until your kids are much older. Because our daughter who came in through kinship was a teenager when we adopted an older teen when we adopted our kids from Ukraine. And then after all four of them were home and we were desperate and looking for help and discovered all of that and began to apply those principles to those kids, the more I learned, the more I recognized, oh my goodness, our daughter who came in through kinship absolutely had experienced trauma. We just didn't recognize that we knew her mom had died of cancer, so we knew there was loss. We tried to support her in that, but we didn't really know all of the trauma that she had endured before coming into our home from the time her mom died until she came to us a few years later. So we began to recognize that this, we need to apply these principles with her. And here she is so much older. And in some ways it felt like damage was done in our relationship because we were very punitive parents up until that point, right? There was discipline and correction and you can spend so much time doing that there's no room for connection and you don't even sometimes feel like connecting, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it, that kind of damage it seemed like was done. But as the more I learned, even, that the power of saying yes, right? Giving yeses, when she was much older, began to even that little bit of something that seems like it wouldn't make a difference made a huge difference. And now she's in her 30s and she's married and she has a baby and our relationship is better than it's ever been.
Mm.
But that's where I started with her was just saying yes. Um,
Mm.
and lots of different ways I did that, but definitely helped. So for our listeners who might not be too familiar, because you gave the example of we stop saying no, can you give a concrete example of what that would look like when we're parenting?
Hmm. So if it was like they wanted to have or go to a park, let's say, and we really had to go someplace else instead. Um, instead of saying, no, we're not going there, it's even if we were in a hurry, instead of the short answer of no, get your shoes on, we have to go to this other place instead. Um, I would try to find ways, that first we have to go and take care of this errand. First we have to go see the doctor. We're going to do these things, and then yes, we will go to the park after that. And so, just little things like that made a big difference for them. And I did try to follow through then on that. If I had given a yes, that I needed to follow through on it. And in the beginning, some of the ways that I could get out of saying no is I will have to think about that, or we'll see, let's talk about that later. And that worked for a little while. But of course, they're very smart. And so, real quick, the let mama think about that became the same connotation as if I had just said no.
Right, right.
So
Okay,
the
so that-
strategies had to kind of grow and evolve as the children were growing.
Yeah, but I like that. So instead of saying no, it's more like not yet, or yes, we can do that after we go to the doctor appointment kind of thing. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
When I could, I tried to do the yes first.
So at some point you found out your kids had been prenatally exposed to alcohol, and then did you find out at birth? Like how old were they when you at least had that information?
Yeah, so we did find out within um I don't remember if it was at birth with our first daughter, but it was very soon after. I just remember always knowing that they had been prenatally exposed to alcohol and multiple drugs. The lack of prenatal care, all of that. Um, and you know, what that meant for us at that time was, well, they might have some learning challenges.
Right.
They might need to have an IEP in school. You might, end up with some kiddos that have that you might end up with some kiddos that have ADHD. And I was super worried about them having ADHD, really worried about that because I was like, oh, great. Um, you know, um, that's a lot to handle. But even that, I brushed it aside.
Yeah.
And it was just my own, you know, in my head, you know, even looking at, the possibility of them having ADHD, I don't even know why that struck me so big at the time.
Mhm.
But we brought it all down to, if there are kiddos, we love them, we'll deal with things as they come. So that's all we were expecting is maybe they would be a little more active than neurotypical kids, which we didn't even know what neurotypical was at that point. That was
Right,
a word
right.
that we learned along the way. Yeah, so and the learning challenges, I was a homeschooling mom at the time. So I was like, oh, that's fine. I'll just tailor their education to where they're at. It'll be fine. I'm used to this kind of stuff. We'll be fine, was our thought.
Yeah. Similarly, my boys, we suspected when we brought home the youngest one, he was 5 when he came home, that we knew we're like, okay, so this is probably that fetal alcohol syndrome thing that we heard about. So we did go and get him tested. We took him to a developmental pediatrician along with the next one up, the second in line from youngest to oldest. So the two boys were 6 and 8 when they got diagnosed, and the developmental pediatrician gave us, they both got diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome and ADHD, and we got a pamphlet on ADHD and like we're sent on our merry way. So we didn't even know like what does this even mean? And when I went to the internet to search fetal alcohol syndrome, it was the most scary and dark and
Mhm.
hopeless outcomes that we could anticipate for our kids. And I just remember like turning off the computer, like, this is not going to happen to our family. And right about that time is when I found the Connected Child book. So we sort of dove into that, which worked wonderfully in so many ways until they became teenagers. And then it was like, wait, I think we need to like take a second look at this FAS, because I think what's going on now may be more because we had connection and attachment and all of those things were going good. But then there were like these really crazy things that were like, what is going on? And that's when we began to really dive into, what is this fetal alcohol syndrome and what does that mean? And there was, thankfully by then, that's when I found facets and all of that. But for you guys, at what point, you know, did you take your boys or your kids to get diagnosed? What primary symptoms of FASD were you seeing? I guess we could go there.
Right. So when we first went to the ADHD clinic, we had put it off for a long time, and my pediatrician was finally like, "Look, you need to go," because I didn't want my kids on medication. I'm not that kind of mom. We're not doing meds, but at the same time, they were taking their beds apart, and they were little, like really little. They were taking their entire beds apart. We had a wooden privacy fence in the backyard that they were also taking apart. Everything was getting destroyed. Like they didn't just play, things were getting
Mhm.
destroyed. And they didn't watch TV.
Mhm.
You know how you have to pull some kids away from the TV. They just didn't pay any attention to the TV.
Yeah.
So those were some of the things that I was noticing. Um, and so we went to the ADHD clinic. And of course, they, did put them on meds. And I was a little resistant, but I was also desperate because they also did not sleep. They did not sleep at all. And having four very young children who were not sleeping, we were coping as well as we could. We were making pallets on the floor in our bedroom. We even moved a love seat into our bedroom so they could sleep on that. Some of them slept in the bed with us because it was literally the only way that we could get any sleep. And so the meds happened because we were just getting desperate. And I have a much different view on that now, of course. I think that it's seeing the difference that the meds made for them, it helped them. It wasn't about helping me to be able to get some sleep at night. I saw where it was helping them to be
Mhm.
able to function better. I have, like I said, I have a much, much different view on medications at this point. Um, and then the same thing. I mean, we coasted along for a while. Life was absolutely crazy, just crazy. So many different things that I just thought that I wasn't handling things well. I thought that I had lost my touch with um, homeschooling. My older kids were still homeschooling, and a lot of it they had to start doing themselves. A lot of their homeschooling became self-directed and self-taught because I was just,
Mhm.
there's no other word for it. I was just drowning, and
Yeah.
dad was working. Um, so. Uh, the research continued, trying to find help or support continued. We had the Pearl Project. We were learning more about TBRI, and I do better in that kind of a format. Um, I do better with the like being part of the group,
Mhm.
learning that way, watching the videos and things like that. I bought the books, and it was so bad because I couldn't I couldn't devote enough time to actually be reading the books.
Mhm.
And so it really, and it's hard too because when I get overwhelmed, a lot of times I pull way back, especially when, we're getting comments from people about, how our children are behaving, and we are starting to sink further and further into like just despair, loving our children completely and not wanting to do without any of them, but just not knowing what to do. And so we would just withdraw. Um, and so that was a big thing for us. So it drove me back to, staying connected with the Pearl Project, reconnecting more with the Florida Center, getting my kids in to be diagnosed. And that came, it was several years later. And one of the things that was hard for me with that too is, like in seeking a diagnosis, was the paperwork that's involved in it. And it
Mhm.
was just so hard, um, having to take a good hard look at their history, um, which led into the history of their first mom. And that was a very difficult thing for me because um, I even now to this day, I have a very deep love for our birth mom, and I've never met her. I know all the things in the paperwork that, where she missed the mark, and maybe mistakes were made or bad choices were made. But there are things that are not in the paperwork that I know, that she went to a safe hospital and, had these babies in a safe environment and didn't try to hide and keep people from having to know her story. She took that chance and went to where it was safe to have these babies. And so, um, so when we're trying to do paperwork to get them in to be diagnosed, just seeing the her history and knowing what brought her to a place of having these addictions in her life. My kids are second generation foster children. Um, I don't think of them as having ever been in foster care because our intention was to adopt them all along. But legally, when they were born, they were second generation foster kids, and the generational trauma that went in with that, and just having to, like I say, take a good hard look at the history that their mom had been through, was really difficult. But so finally made it through all of that though, and then got them to the clinic where they could be diagnosed.
Yeah, similar stories. I think our stories, can be very different, but very similar too. So I can totally relate to that. And then just for our listeners who might not be familiar with the symptoms of FASD, some of those are memory problems, impulse control, like lack of impulse control, language and communication challenges, nutrition. You can chime in with any of them. Slower processing pace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more you want to add? I'm trying to like go through my head and
Right, right. Yeah. And the thing is that for me, when I hear those, none of them sound that bad. Memory problems. I have memory problems too. I have some impulse control issues. Um, so they don't sound that scary, but like the impulse control, where you're, having to chase your child out of a busy road, it's that kind of impulse control. And, um, you know, uh, it just, when you're actually seeing these things play out, it's so much bigger than, just hearing those words. I don't know if everybody finds that, but that was significant for me. And even like the memory problems, with schooling, when I was starting them, in pre-K and kindergarten, and we're doing it at home, and we're going through our little books. And the following week, we try to move forward and had to go all the way back to the beginning again.
like
And
they'd never seen it before.
we had never seen it
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
I was feeling worse and worse. I was like, gee whiz, what is wrong with me? I have lost my touch. I'm, ruining these kids. Um, and so, um, that was something that we saw a lot of. Uh, and yeah, the different eating things. Now, my kiddos have always been good eaters, but they did have a lot of the GI type of issues. A lot of kiddos with prenatal exposure, are having big GI problems, and some of that for one of my children was went back to emergency surgery he had had in the NICU. But some of it is, I didn't know what was going on at the time. But now, of course, having education, I know that, a lot of that was just the sensory system, and,
Yeah.
not understanding when, they had to, they didn't know how to interpret the senses and the sensations that their body was giving them. So
The
the
internal
sensory issues
senses.
were big for us too.
Yeah, sensory and a lot of the executive function stuff. So decision making and being that more of a concrete thinker, problems with math and reading
Right.
and those kinds of things. And
Yeah.
just gosh, there's a whole slew of symptoms that we could just not linking cause and effect, right? And
Right.
understanding things like that, not learning
Yeah.
from consequences. And then there's the piece where developmentally they're kind of at a younger than their biological age. So I know a lot of those things, and not every person with an FASD has every one of the symptoms. Mine with FAS seem to have every one of the symptoms, including the facial features, but not everybody does, and it's a spectrum, right? But when you start hearing all of those symptoms and you understand what they are, then it's I know a lot of parents start, that light bulb goes off and they're like, oh my gosh, you've just described my kid, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so once you went to the Florida Center to get everybody diagnosed, is that how that worked? You can tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, so it was the only place in Florida that I could take them to for this sort of evaluation. And so we went in, and it was through that too that I started seeing more of the characteristics. Like a big thing for us was communication.
Yeah.
Like they would be able to talk to me about things, but then there was just some sort of a big disconnect, you know? So that was something else that I needed to explore. And their team there was just really fabulous. They had a neuropsychologist that did their comprehensive exam, and then they work with an occupational therapist, speech therapist, and a licensed mental health therapist. Uh, and I was worried about taking them in, you know, because they, you know, our kiddos are active and don't like tests and things like that. But it was just such a positive experience for each of my kids. They really seemed to enjoy it. You know, kiddos with FASD usually do like one-on-one attention. So it was kind of a day devoted to them. So they didn't mind that much at all. And then, you know, it's a 2-day process for each of them. And it was for us, it had, by now, it was, we were coming out of like their evaluations were taking place in 2021. And
Mhm.
so, you know, there were a lot of COVID restrictions still in place. So some of our evaluation was virtual, it was like a hybrid. Um, and then, you know, following that, then getting, you know, we had a follow-up appointment where we just kind of briefly went over what the team saw with our kiddos. And then following that, we got their reports, which I was not prepared for how long the reports were. 30 pages all about your child and, you know, where their strengths are and where their struggles are is a lot of information to take in, especially times 4, as you know. um, so it was, and it was difficult to get the results. You know, that was a hard thing, but it was also so good to be able to you know, to be validated, to realize that, you know, it wasn't something that I had lost touch
Mhm.
with. It wasn't something that my kids were just, you know, being especially naughty. Um, and I say that just because I don't like using the word bad, but
Right.
everybody around me was using that word. They just thought that, you know, sometimes we just, you know, had bad kids. And it was just so validating, though, to see that, you know, it's not about my kiddos being bad or naughty, or even just aloof, you know, or not thinking that there were actual, you know, they were having brain challenges.
Yeah.
Their brains were struggling and they were doing the very best that they could. Um, you know, so it was very empowering to getting the report and knowing, you know, what we need to do next. What do we need to be looking at? You know, how should we be setting things up at home, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. So it sounds like the Florida Center, you don't just go for diagnosis. There's lots of other supports and services there.
Yeah, so for the younger children, especially because they do have an on-site daycare called the Starfish Academy, and they have a great team of OT and speech where they can see younger children. They have mental health therapists at the time that were going into the schools in Sarasota County, and so they were offering a lot in that realm.
Ah. Goodness, because I know when my boys got diagnosed by a developmental pediatrician, like I said, we got a pamphlet on ADHD, and I think he might have said something like, "You might want to focus on life skills." Like that was all there was. There was nothing else given to us, no place else that we were pointed, so we didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
Like I said, what was on the internet at the time was terrible, so dove into the connected child stuff, which did help. And I do have to say that Dr. Purvis, I remember like we had a diagnosis, but I didn't know anything. So we were focusing on the connected child stuff. And I remember one of the conferences that we attended, she said something from the main stage. And I'm like, now I think about it, I'm like, that was brutal. And we shouldn't say these things now, but this is what she said back then. She said, if you are parenting a child who was exposed to alcohol, you have a child with brain damage. And
Mhm.
I remember kind of the same thing. It was like, oh, it was validating because it's like, okay, this isn't my bad parenting. I can get, I can get behind the fact that my child has something like that going on with his brain. So like now what do we do to help? right? Because that would be the understanding. If if there was some other diagnosis that involved the brain, we're gonna step in and help. So for me, that was a game changer, even though I still didn't really know anything about FASD. It wasn't until, again, my boys became teenagers, and then I was desperately looking for help and then found facets. So, and I know that that was something that you did too. So, but since we were talking about the Florida Center, I was going to ask some of these questions later, but I'm thinking our listeners are like, wait, tell us more about that.
Okay.
Is it just for residents of Florida? Do they see out of state patients?
So we have funding for children up to the age of 22 that live in the state of Florida. If they are within Florida, residents of Florida, um, then they are able to come through our clinic at no charge because of our funding, which is just a really, really wonderful thing. Because those evaluations, they're so important, but they can sometimes be out of reach for people. Um, so if we have clients, we're starting to broaden the horizon a little bit. And so we are able to see clients from outside of the state of Florida now. Unfortunately, we don't have funding if they're coming in from out of state, but we are able to provide the services for them. And so we're offering more paid clinics now. So we can see kiddos from within Florida and also from out of state. So that's really nice too.
That is wonderful because I know with with what I do with this podcast and with our support group and the training that I do, that's what everybody wants to know. Where do I go to get diagnosed, and where do I go to get help? And because a lot of what I do is online, it's families across the country
Mhm.
desperately seeking help. And then I'm in New York, in the Albany area, in the capital region. My boys got diagnosed by a developmental pediatrician, but I've sent local families to that same developmental pediatrician, and they've been told things like, well, we're going to wait and see, or come
Mhm.
back in a year, and it's like, and I understand, doctors are, they want maternal admission, right, of alcohol
Right.
consumption. They want the facial features, they want things like that. But it's like, you know, to me, it's so clear, even though I'm not a doctor and not giving medical advice, but it's like, you know, a family to be told to come back in a year isn't much help. We do have in the western part of the state in Rochester, at the clinic there, Dr. Christy Petrenko. There's an FASD clinic there. There's over a year and a half wait, from what I understand. There's one specialist down in New York City, which a local family just went down. They took their teen down to New York City, which was overwhelming and overstimulating and very stressful. But he did get a diagnosis of ARND, alcohol related, I think it was alcohol related neurodevelopmental disorder. And so he's on the spectrum. So it's so hard to find places depending on what state you live in. So
Mhm.
I'm grateful that Florida has the Florida Center, where families can go and not just get diagnosed for their kiddos, but support. So we'll make sure that we put a link in the show notes to the Florida Center. So if any of our listeners want to pursue and look into you guys as a resource, because what do you are a coach, right? Tell us what you do at the Florida Center.
Yeah, so since the time when my kids were diagnosed there, um, again, I can't say enough good things about the Florida Center, not just because I work there, but just because it's been so meaningful in my life. And the same goes for our director, Tamra. She is, I always call her, she's just such a visionary. And she's always looking for ways where our services can improve. And, so I'm very grateful for that. So yeah, so we have in my role, I'm a parent advocate, and I get to work with families either as they're preparing to go through clinic, or more specifically, I work with a lot of the families as they're coming out of clinic. And
Mhm.
so I do like 2 week and 2 month follow-ups with each of the families. Ask them, how are you doing? How was clinic? What'd you think? Um, uh, and then we can actually meet one-on-one over Zoom in a format like this and take a look at their report, see if they understand the report, what parts might be a little confusing to them. Because sometimes it's just, so overwhelming getting the information that it's just kind of like all the information all at once. And now I'm going to put that in my binder and, give that to the doctors when I need to. but one of the parent advocate before me is Jen Warden, and I like what she used to say about the report, that this is our tool. This is our tool. We need to get it out. We need to mark it up, highlight it, circle some things so that we know what to ask for when we're going to therapies. And it's just, it's such a great way to be able to tailor the care for our kids. So that's kind of what I get to do is, help caregivers look at it, get comfortable with it, don't be afraid of it. Can we break down any of the terms in there so that it's easier for us to understand? And then, if they're sometimes I'm working with some families that, maybe their kiddo is not able to come through our clinic because of a lack of, confirmed exposure. They've got all the characteristics. They're, really struggling. Parents are really struggling, but we don't have evidence that birth mom actually drank. And so they, without that, it's difficult to get in and have an evaluation. But in cases like that, it's really nice because I'm still able to meet with families, even if they don't come through the clinic. So we can, go over some of these things, like the brain-based challenges that their child is having, and, trying to get that, directing them to the resources, like good books, and, trying differently rather than harder. And, there's so many great books out there, and just, trying to make that mind shift of, it's not a matter of your kids can't or won't do this. It's, they can't do some things. And I can direct them to for families that are really having some intense things going on. We are offering mental health services at the Florida Center, and it's caregiver focused. We have families moving forward. We do a lot of trainings with facets, and just all kinds of different trainings through our Florida Center Training Institute. So we're trying really hard to get good information to our caregivers, help them grow and learn. And, like I said, if they are needing some more intense things, we've got our mental health therapists that they can begin meeting with. That's something that I participated in myself, and it was really instrumental in helping me to turn around and, just be able, I was dealing with some blocked care,
Be
and just,
real.
yes, very real, and just the overwhelm. So all of these things put together, though, really, helped to turn me around. And it was through the Florida Center too that I learned about Jeff Noble and got connected with his podcast and then his coaching program. So all of these things have just made such a difference, such a huge difference in our life.
I love that. So, website for the Florida Center, do you have that?
Yes, so it's thefloridacenter.org, and Florida spelled out Florida.
And we will put a link in the show notes for sure to the Florida Center, because it would be my dream to have a Florida Center in New York. I guess we would call it the New York Center, but you know, uh, Dr. Petrenko's clinic out in Rochester is fabulous, but like Florida, because it is the Florida Center it's really the only center like it in Florida.
It is, yeah. We're the only diagnostic FASD diagnostic clinic in Florida.
And is there like a wait? Like I know in at the clinic in Rochester, it's like a year and a half. Is there a long wait for families to get in to the
It
Florida?
is not as long as it used to be. So our wait list is not a year and a half, thank goodness. And we have expanded, part of, my visionary director, Tamara. We have 3 clinics in the state of Florida now. So we have our main clinic in Sarasota. We have clinics in Orlando, 2 campuses in Orlando. And last year we added a clinic in Pensacola. So we're really spread out around the state.
Wow, that is fabulous. I'm thrilled to hear that, and I encourage our listeners to go to the website and check out the Florida Center, because an invaluable resource for sure.
Yeah, and if when you share the website address, I'd be happy to give you my email address, because if they have questions about getting an appointment at the Florida Center, or anything, if they know for sure that they can't go to the Florida Center, they can still touch base with me, and we can still, our mission is to support our caregivers because it is so difficult. And so we just, we don't want anybody out there feeling like they're on their own, because that's, it's a dangerous place to be.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphans.ny.org/hope-community.
So highly recommend folks check out the Florida Center, link in the show notes for sure. And we'll put Crystal's email address in there so you can always reach out to her as well if you have questions about that. So your kiddos got diagnosed, and we know that FASD is a spectrum. My boys have fetal alcohol syndrome. What did your kiddos get?
So each of them did receive a diagnosis of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. My youngest, that first diagnosis that he got of fetal alcohol syndrome, he may, I'm not sure where exactly he's falling in that range. He has a lot of the struggles, and he's got a pretty moderate, significant intellectual disability as well. And so it is funny though, having so many children that are on the spectrum. I get to see the full spectrum in our house. Some of my kiddos are not having that many big characteristics. And it's so funny because sometimes I think that maybe it's not even noticeable in some of them. But then things will catch me off guard, or somebody will ask me a question about something that they're noticing, and I'll just start thinking, oh yeah, I guess that is noticeable. But I think sometimes I don't notice it as much because some of mine are, having bigger behavioral symptoms or bigger struggles. But it is interesting to be able to see, all of the different ways that plays out in my kiddos.
Yeah, I hear you. Because even with my 2 that are diagnosed, one does also have an intellectual disability, so severely impacted, may not ever drive, needs one-on-one support for so many things. And then I have another one who, he drives, he's a volunteer firefighter, very small physically, with other things going on, but yet, and has lots of strengths, but yet every once in a while there'll be something like, okay, yes,
There it is.
thing. Yes. So it's very interesting. And then looking back at some of the other kids that, because we didn't know so much about FASD back then, knowing that, knowing all of the characteristics now, I'm like, oh yeah, there's probably some exposure in a couple of the other ones, but it wasn't glaring or difficult. It wasn't the impulse control. It wasn't those things, right? So it didn't seem as hard. We just thought it was like, oh yeah, a little bit of learning challenge and with the homeschooling, and we'll figure that out, and things like that. So it's pretty amazing how it is a spectrum, and but then when you know it and you see it, so. And I know you're not a facilitator, like I'm a facilitator of the Facets neurobehavioral model, but you've taken some of the Facets training because you mentioned that the Florida Center has that. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about your experience with Facets.
I love Facets. I love learning about the brain. I love learning, the different, just kind of breaking it down and seeing, learning about the different functions, of the brain, and how that is responsible for, so many of the quote unquote behaviors that we see, and just learning more about how these, behaviors, are symptoms of what's going on in their brain, where their struggles are, symptoms of the brain injury or the brain damage. And the best thing, obviously about learning these things is learning how to support our kids, how to accommodate. And it just always blows my mind that, so many of these things, when I think back to when I was really drowning, and struggling to just survive the day. And after some education and learning more about these things, being able to see how, just adjusting certain things just a little bit, like, maybe controlling the tone of our voice, or, maybe remembering that, it's, my 18-year-old being defiant about something or giving a lot of pushback on something. Really, they're not 18. And if I stop and consider that they're more like 8 or 9, how that just brings everything into perspective, where you can really struggle with the 18-year-old on an issue if, when we do reframe it and do see them at their developmental age, um, it just becomes so easy, I think, in so many ways. And I don't know if that's oversimplifying it. Um, but that just, even, even now when it happens, it just blows me away sometimes, the, how easy it can be to take care of some of these things when we know, what the struggle is, if we can name it, that, that they are just, the impulse control, that's where it's at. And so we, instead of, demanding that they not do something, if we just remove the risk, and remove the temptation, that we can, just help them to be successful.
Yeah, and it is. It seems super simple, some of the accommodations, but yet they work, and it can be a game changer, in our family. And that's, when we figured that out, it's like, okay, one step direction, just give a one step direction at a time instead of a whole verbal slew of this is what I want you to do. You got to do this, this, and this, and but by breaking things down into simple steps and then just expecting, one at a time, we can get much more accomplished that way than, giving them a whole slew of things and then they don't do it because they can't do it. And then we are issuing consequences because it looks like they didn't do what they were told. And then the whole thing unravels and the meltdown and all of that. You can avoid so much of that by just applying very simple accommodations, understanding how the brain works differently. So I love that too. I love facets as well. Love that you're part of, part of that. They're doing that at the Florida Center. You mentioned Jeff Noble and his group. What do you do there?
So I had been on his Facebook page for quite a while and listened to his podcasts and that sort of thing. And one year I sat in on his 3-day workshop that he does every year, and really wanted to join his coaching program, but just didn't feel like that we could, financially afford it that year. And so we didn't do it. And of course, we went through a whole year then of really struggling. Because even when you know these things, and it can be very easy to tweak some things and put the accommodation in there. It's not always easy to remember to do it,
Right.
or to keep ourselves reminded that these things work. I mean, we're flesh and bone, and so things, get hard. Um, and so the next time that he did the 3-day workshop, um, I had my husband watch with me, and we really, we were praying about it because it was going to be, a big sacrifice to be able to do something like that. But at the same time, I'm a firm believer that there's always going to be a cost.
Mhm.
Um, we can either pay financially, or we can pay with our emotions. We can pay spiritually, we can pay physically, but there's going to be a cost. And so then it just becomes a matter of, weighing out, which am I willing to pay. And
Mhm.
so we just, we readjusted our budget, made some cuts here and there. And I can remember he had said that I think it was that year he had like a 30 days. You could decide within 30 days if it's going to work for you. And if not, you could opt out. And I was like, okay, well, we can do this for 30 days. And it just became so impactful that I tell friends even now that um, uh, if I had to walk on the side of the road and collect aluminum cans and recycle them so that I could pay for his program, I would have done it. But that's just, a testament to, how impactful the program was for us. And we've stuck with it too. We're now part of his coaching program. And so we're lifetime subscribers because it's just, and it's like that with, for us, it was, the Florida Center, the Pro Project, and Jeff Noble's courses. Um, People can find their community, wherever they're at. And it's just, it's so important to be part of a community. We tried to do it on our own. We tried to do it with the support of our family and friends that were around us at the time. And that's just, it's difficult. It was difficult for us, and I'm sure it was difficult for them because they don't understand what's going on. And so even if they were trying, we needed more. And so it's just invaluable to be connected to people who understand it, who, when you say, um, you know, my kids are going nuts today. I, had to clean poop off the wall that was, you know, on the second story, we had an open foyer at the time, and it was a two-story foyer, and there was poop on the wall way up at the top. And, that just sounds so, you say that to, some people, and they're just like shocked. And, you get with your community, your tribe, your people, and they're like, oh, I know, we had to do that too. I'm sorry you had to do that. Did you
It's
try?
just a day in the life, right?
Right,
It's
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's just so empowering and good for us.
Love it. Love it. And and we can even put a link in the show notes to Jeff Noble's page. So if anybody's interested in learning more about his training and coaching too, that in his podcast, I learned so much from his podcast in the early days as well. I didn't know what I'd never heard the phrase or the term perseveration. And he was
Mm.
interviewing a woman, which is so funny because it turned out to be Rebecca Tallou. And I think it was his interview with Rebecca. And when he I went, like, I tuned in, and when he introduced her and said where she is from, he like kind of botched how to pronounce her town. But I'm like, wait a minute, that's like 15 minutes from where I live. This woman is from like my area. So I I connected with her right away afterward, but they were talking about perseveration. And I remember listening and going, oh my gosh, it has a name, because like we live with perseveration, our kids just, it's part of it. And I didn't, so it was just kind of like, okay, it has a name, it's a thing. Like, and then it was just more palatable, like, right, okay, it is what it is, and it's not going anywhere, but it's good to know that it's another one of those things. So, and then for any of our listeners who don't know, perseveration is really when our kids get like hyper fixated on something, whatever that something might be, and it's all they can talk about and all they can think about. And it can drive a parent a little crazy. But
Mhm.
understanding, it's like their brain just gets stuck, right? It's
Mhm.
that very rigid thinking. And sometimes sometimes I do find myself saying, okay, we're going to move on. We've covered all of this. We're going to move on. And sometimes they can, and then sometimes they can't. And it's
Mhm.
just, but I even just knowing, okay, it has a name and it's part of this, it helps me to be able to cope with it a little bit better, when
Mhm.
it's happening, because it can be a little crazy.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's one of the biggest characteristics that my youngest has. And he um, perseverates so, so badly. I mean, and it can multiple things in a day. It can wake him up at night,
Yeah.
which wakes
Oh,
me up
yeah.
at night. He's, waking us up with the same thought and asking the same questions. And so, um, kind of going back to what I had said just a few minutes ago about how easy some things are to tweak to take care of. That is one that I haven't found an easy tweak for that. So send me all your tips.
Yeah.
We're still working on that one. It is hard for us as parents,
Yeah.
and it drives him. It's just so, so difficult for my kiddo, and that's usually what precipitates his bigger rages. It starts in something that he's perseverating over. We feel like it probably is starting in anxiety.
Mhm.
So it's a big one. It's a
Yes,
hard
it
thing.
can become, for sure. And I can see that in especially the older they get, because I find that my son will, something will happen because he has a part-time job. Recently, somebody got fired. Um, and so that upsets him because there's change at work. He worries about that person, and then he's having a lot of anxiety about it, and it's all he can think about. And he works nights washing dishes and usually sleeps in late in the morning. And the other morning I got up and it was early and I heard something in his room and he was awake. And I'm like, "You're awake? You should, you would normally be awake sleeping." He goes, "I did not sleep all night long. I've been staying up thinking about this." And I'm like, "Oh no, because you have to go to work tonight. Like you can't not sleep." So, and just knowing there's the negative side of it, but understanding where it comes from, they just get stuck on something and it's not so easy for them to then pivot and move on.
No.
It's super hard. So it's good knowing, it's not easy to live with and it's hard to deal with, but it's at least knowing it really stems from how his brain works. So we
Right.
have to take that into consideration. We can't just say, "Stop thinking about that."
Yeah.
Because it's
So we're
not,
done now.
yeah, that doesn't work.
Nope.
But I have had times where I say, "Okay, we're going to move on," and I might have to say that numerous times. And just because it may be like in, the next 20 minutes we've moved on, he's right back at it an hour from now on the same thing. So it's super,
Right.
super hard. So for sure. So Crystal, how old are your kiddos now and how are they doing?
So they are 18, 20, 20, and 22.
Wow. So
Yeah, so one of my 20-year-olds will be 21 in just a few weeks. Um, and they're doing pretty well. I am, looking back over my history, with learning about FASD and always feeling like I was learning things too late. I was starting things too late. I'm very grateful that we learned when we did. Um, and I'm still learning even now,
oh yeah.
because we're able to put things in place to help them to be successful. Um, Several of mine, will probably not live independently, which was a, extremely scary thought when I first was realizing that, when it was first dawning on me. Um, but it's not so much scary anymore. It's just, okay, well, let's get to work. Let's figure this out. Let's, see what kind of life skills we need to be teaching and what we can do. Staying in, touch with our community, just all the time, bouncing ideas off of each other, brainstorming, um, uh, you know, and so that they're doing pretty well. One of my 22-year-old daughter, she's living in an independent living home right now. So there's not a ton of supervision there. So it gets a little scary for me sometimes, but she's doing well. I use a lot of visuals with her. You were talking about, doing things in step-by-step instructions. I found that visuals are really super helpful for all four of my kiddos. Either texting them instructions, like one thing at a time, where they can read it and they have it saved on their phone. Or with my 22-year-old, she was getting in trouble because she wasn't keeping things picked up or neat around her. She would leave a room and it's kind of like a little tornado came through, 22-year-old tornado. Um, and so, we've put up some visuals for her, and it's keeping her on track. And that's one of those things where, she was at risk of getting, evicted from where she was living. And a small thing of, I wrote out some instructions on a piece of paper and we taped it up on the wall. And suddenly that problem is much better.
Oh,
She's not, keeping things perfect there, but she's trying, and she's doing a pretty good job of it. So I'm really proud of her for that. And just, it's a lifelong thing. They're not going to outgrow FASD. They're not going to
right.
outgrow brain damage, brain injury. It's going to be there. But we can, help them to be successful by, the support that we put in place, the accommodations, making sure that the people around them know what kind of support that they're going to need. And, um, you know, yeah, they're doing okay.
Oh, I love to hear that. And we've got one of ours that will not live independently, and then one that sort of has a interdependent situation. He'll be in a
Yeah.
little apartment on our that we added onto our garage. And so he can feel like he's got that independence, but he's got a little bit of oversight. But yeah, it's nothing that we anticipated when we first stepped into adoption and foster care. But it's like, okay, we're going to work with what we have here because we love our kids and we want them to be successful, and we're going to be a key part of their success, right? They're going to need that support. So thank you for sharing that. So you selected the scripture that I opened with today, and I'll read it again because it was early on. I read it in the intro. But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So, Crystal, what does John 14:26 through 27 mean to you?
Well, it just means so much to me. Uh, you know, having that peace that only God can give, knowing that He called us to this life that we are living, and that He, at the end of the day, even when things are overwhelming and all that, we know that I have peace that things are working out, that my kids are going to be okay. He loves my kiddos far more than I can even love them. And I just, love, when Jesus was talking about, that he was about to ascend into heaven and his disciples didn't want him to go and didn't understand what was happening. And he said, well, don't worry, I'm leaving you a helper. And when you break that word down, it literally means an advocate. And, that's just such a picture of who we are as moms, dads too, but dads, a lot of times are, you can see an example of fathers, of course, in the Trinity, as Father God caring for his children, protecting, providing, and all of that, and being able to look to the Trinity and see that example of motherhood as well. That whether it's running out onto the baseball field to advocate for our child, or running into the school to advocate in IEP meetings, even as they are growing and learning and becoming more independent or interdependent. Um, Advocating for them on, their needs. It's, we're called to this. The Lord, placed these children in our homes. He trusted us with them. He didn't send them to punish us. He sent them because they needed us and we needed them. That's always been a big thing in our story, that, I'm not just, they're not lucky that they're with us, that we're the lucky ones. We had a need in our life, and the Lord sent them. So yeah, I'm very grateful for my faith. I don't know where I would be without knowing that God has a plan and that all of this has been part of his plan. And we can, even on the hard days when it's hard to, remember that sometimes, we know that it's true, and that somehow, some way, he's making things work out. And, the kids are going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being on this journey without the Lord.
Mm-mm.
I know folks are doing it, but I can't imagine it. And I'm so grateful for my faith too, because that's what sustains us, because it's not an easy road. But he did set our children into our family, and he equips us and helps us with what we need to do as parents. So I love that. Love that. And that our listeners are primarily adoptive and foster parents like us. And as we wrap up, because I feel like we could chat forever, right? But as we wrap up, would you leave us with some words of encouragement, advice for our parents who are listening?
Yeah. So, no matter where you're at on this journey, if you are a person of faith, lean in on the Lord, let him guide you and direct you. Trust your instincts, trust your gut, um, trust your red flags. Also, when the Lord sends you a red flag about something, if something doesn't feel right, especially in where it pertains to our children, trust that. Don't just go by what you think you're supposed to do, but trust your instincts. and stay in community with people that get this. It's going to help you along the way. It's going to help your kiddos. And just, keep your eye on the prize. And, our parenting journey isn't going to be over at 18, but that's okay. It's all right that our kids are going to be okay. And we're going to be there beside them in whatever capacity they need us to be. And, stay connected to the tools that are around us, Yeah. Continue educating yourself. Reading a book or listening to a podcast here or there is not enough. We've got to continually be soaking it in. Just like with the Word of God, we've got to continually soak it in. It's the same with, with our life as FASD caregivers and parents. We've got to continually be in with our community and learning and growing.
Yeah, we need our tools and we need our tribe, right?
Yes.
Crystal, thank you so much for sharing your story and for just all that you're doing there at the Florida Center and supporting and encouraging parents on this journey. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. I just appreciate you and all you're doing in the FASD community so much.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for listening to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast today. I hope that you were encouraged and inspired by my conversation with Crystal. We will have in the show notes all of the links to the places that we talked about, so you can find those resources pretty quick and easy. I hope that you will do that and make sure that you're checking out our Hope for the FASD Journey support community. Crystal will actually be a guest in our group this week when we meet. She'll be on to share her story with our group, and then we have a time of Q&A so our members can interact and ask questions. So if you're looking for your tribe, if you feel like you need a tribe to be a part of, where you can connect and interact with other parents and caregivers on this journey, especially if you suspect FASD, then our Hope for the FASD Journey is definitely a group that you will want to check out. And I hope that you will, because in addition to inspiring you and encouraging you, of course, we want to equip you. So we have the support group. We have the different training that I offer. Every month I offer a free 1-hour intro to FASD, as well as a 3-hour kind of a deeper dive. The 1 hour is not a prerequisite to the 3 hour, although I have a lot of folks who will do the 1 hour and then they'll want more. So they'll do the 3 hour, and then sometimes they'll sign up for twice a year. I offer the deep dive. So you can find information out and sign up for any of the above, as well as coaching. I have FASD parent coaching available. You would go to our website, justicefororphansny.org, and you'll be able to click the buttons and find the training there as well. And I also do blog, and that is over at sandraflach.com right now. And pretty soon with our doing major website updates, where you'll be able to just go to justicefororphansny.org and you'll see it'll say the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, and all of these resources are in one place, so you don't have to hop around. So we're going to make it less confusing. It's not too complicated right now, but we're definitely going to simplify it. So when you go to the website, it is justicefororphansny.org. We do have links again in the show notes to get you to all the right places there. Also, if you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch this podcast, or if you just want to go to YouTube and watch one, if you'd like to watch your podcast, you can do that as well. That would be at the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel, where all of these video versions of the podcast are. And make sure that if you're listening to us on Apple, you leave a review. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to, and let your fellow adoption and foster care friends know about this podcast so that they can utilize it as a resource as well. Be sure to check out, again, our social media. We're on Instagram at AFC_journey, and we're on Facebook as the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. I am grateful that you chose to spend your valuable time with me today. I'm thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.